Some Seattle vegans are hoping for the demise of a storied vegan institution after its owners announce it will start serving meat and dairy products. And it's Tuesday, which means we'll be bringing you some good news for our weekly segment, Good News Day Tuesday. But first, we're going to learn about the Oat Mafia, the people who aim to bring Seattleites their favorite non-dairy milk. Joining us to discuss is a special guest, Aimee Rawlins, a freelance journalist covering climate change, housing, urban design, and environmental policy. Welcome, Aimee.
Thanks so much. I'm excited to be here.
What is your go-to coffee order, Aimee?
It is a very non-exciting drip coffee with some whole milk. Sometimes I get a tea and then I put oat milk in it. So, but I would say that's maybe price increases has really led to just getting the cheapest thing on the menu.
It's a common journalist order. I ask this to other journalists and people often say a drip coffee because it is the cheapest thing you can get. What about you, creative producer Sam J. Leeds? What is your go-to coffee order?
I love to be incredibly basic and go with a oat milk latte. It is the classic for a reason. My poor little pathetic stomach cannot handle real milk, so oat milk was a godsend. So
Truth. So I mean, Seattleites love our non-dairy milks, and Aimee, you recently wrote a piece about the origins of oat milk, and I want to know a little bit about what role did Seattle, if any, have in popularizing oat milk?
Yeah, it's interesting. So obviously Starbucks is here. Seattle is famous for its cafe culture, its coffee shops. So Oatly, which is the biggest oat milk, I think, came into the U.S. market in 2016, 2017. Seattle started testing it out in its markets in a couple years later. And then in March 21, it rolled it out all over the U.S. And it really played a huge role in popularizing and, increasing oat milk consumption overall. So I think there is sort of a direct line to Seattle and consumers here, and just in terms of bringing oat milk countrywide.
Sam, when did you first start ordering oat milk lattes? I feel like what Aimee was saying kind of made me think about the timeline for when oat milk became popular, because I feel like it just kind of appeared one year and I hadn't really thought about how that industry had been built up over time.
So the lactose intolerance runs in my family.
I'm Asian, so same.
Yeah, Jewish. It's a shared problem that we have. But I grew up with lactose-free milk, but it was like Lactaid, just sort of the classic lactose-removed milk. And I remember going over to friends' houses as a kid and trying the milks that they had because I didn't know that I was lactose intolerant yet. And they always tasted bad to me. They were watery. They didn't have a lot going on, whereas Lactaid is kind of sweeter and thicker. And so I honestly don't remember when, I want to say it was pre-pandemic, right, that oat milk took off. But when I tried it for the first time, I was like, oh, this is the closest thing to Lactaid I've experienced in terms of sort of flavor. A very exciting moment for me because there weren't a lot of good options before that.
It's funny you mentioned Lactaid because I actually just switched back to regular milk, but lactose-free regular milk from years of drinking almond milk because almond milk's environmental impact is obviously quite awful. If people didn't know, it takes a lot of water to grow almonds, and that's happening in a lot of water-scarce parts of our country. Aimee, what is oat milk's footprint? Is that more sustainable?
Well, oats in general are a much more sustainable crop, especially I wrote about the farming in the Midwest, and especially when compared to corn and soybeans, which are the two most prominent crops there. So there are some farmers, which, as you mentioned, the Oat Mafia has been on the scene, prevalent for a couple of years, and they really are inspired by the environmental benefits as well as the benefits that they serve for the rest of their crops. Oats are planted earlier in the season, and they suck up nitrogen from the soil, which otherwise would leach into the groundwater. It's quite bad for people and the environment. They also usually plant it with red clover as a cover crop, so they come in afterwards with that, and that actually that also helps the soil. Both of those crops prevent against erosion. And then when looking at their corn and soybean rotations, they also they help prevent against disease and pests. And it's just it's a more robust mix. And so, yeah, the environmental benefits of oats are actually quite strong. And so while it's like, I don't actually know Oatly's, environmental footprint, but I think that as a crop is much more sustainable than something like almonds.
God, I just love the phrase Oat Mafia. So tell us a little bit about this Oat Mafia. You mentioned, they're Midwest farmers, and I didn't realize this before, that a lot of oat milk comes from sources outside of the US, but it seems like these folks are trying to make it easier for us to have kind of a industry around oat milk in the US.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so the vast majority of oats that are consumed in the US come from Canada, and that's sort of a function of corn and soybeans just being so heavily subsidized over the years, both from crop insurance and also, ethanol subsidies. So it made financial sense for farmers to be growing corn and soybeans because there was so much protection against risk there. And so oats moved to Canada. They're also a cold weather crop. In Canada, their temperatures are chillier. General Mills, Quaker, they're both headquartered in the Midwest, and those are the big oat producers that we think of, but they're still getting most of their oats from Canada. So I would say, yeah, the vast majority of oats you're consuming, whether it's milk or oatmeal or whatever, at this point, food grade oats are largely not in the US, except for, as you said, these farmers are trying to bring it back.
Mm-hmm. And how are tariffs playing into this? Like, are oats for oat milk going to get more expensive?
I mean, I think everything is getting more expensive.
True.
as we see. So I feel confident saying yes, even though I don't have specific numbers there. I think that, it's interesting. I spoke with a professor at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, Joe Jansen, about the role that tariffs kind of might play into this. And he was skeptical right now just because, building up the infrastructure, building up the supply chains for a new crop like oats within the US takes so much time. And so right now, and I think, to put it mildly, things are a little uncertain. And so we don't know what's happening tomorrow, let alone, in 3-5 years, whatever. So he was basically saying that changing your entire supply chain because of something that might happen down the road is just a little unsure. But I do think the tariffs and just the instability, the economic instability in general, has made people rethink our supply chains and why we're sourcing so much from outside the US. And I think for food security, for national security, there's a real push to bring things back stateside. And I don't think the farmers are necessarily thinking about that. They see it as something that they can make money on and really be beneficial for their land and for their other crops. But it's requiring a lot of work on their part.
So if a lot of the oats are grown in Canada and colder weather is good for oats, could we grow oats here? Is there a reason that the larger industry hasn't really taken off beyond what's in the Midwest?
And do you mean here, like Seattle here? Or do you mean, I mean, I guess not
Washington,
Seattle,
maybe?
but
Yeah.
that's
maybe I don't know, little pea patch oat. I don't know how oats are grown.
That's such a good question. I only chatted with the folks in the Midwest because that's where our the vast swaths of farming are. So I don't know, but I like that question. And, I think the farmers out there started with really small, they did 5 acres to start with, kind of testing it, and then have gradually expanded what they're offering. And they, as they see more success, they're continuing to add more. Eastern Washington is really hot. I don't know how it compares to
That's true.
Minnesota, but I know that Martin Larson, who was one of the founders of the Oat Mafia, and someone I spoke with, because I asked him about the climate piece, as obviously temperatures are increasing, extreme weather is getting more unpredictable. And he said, really, that's true for all crops. It's not just oats and the temperatures. He said in 2023, it was a major drought year and his oats were never better. Meanwhile, the soybeans were miserable and he had a terrible crop. So he sees it basically as another way of risk mitigation, even while acknowledging that we're all kind of stuck when it comes to the changing climate and the way it's impacting food.
I'm curious. I know that, on the dairy side of things, there's pretty big government subsidies to keep the dairy industry going. If you want a rabbit hole for our listeners, look up government cheese. Well,
and for corn, as Aimee has alluded to.
Yes. Yeah. When you go to a coffee shop in Seattle, oat milk usually costs extra. And I'm curious if you have insight into why, even though based milks are incredibly popular now, and a lot of people aren't necessarily drinking cow milk, why it still costs more to order that at a coffee shop versus, the standard milk.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I don't have, candidly, don't have specific insight there, but I do think, we do see so many subsidies for some of these entrenched. I mean, you see it with like the beef industry, you see it with like big dairy. There was a good story a few years back, I think in Grist, about the butter lobby that was like wild. So yeah, I mean, I just think oats just don't get federal help, and they don't. And it's both the subsidies, but it's also, I think, the federal government pays about 60% of premiums for corn and soybeans for insurance. And so that it mitigates so much risk when you know that they're backstopping you. And, one thing Martin Larson said that I thought was so like on point was that it should be easier to try to grow something that's more environmentally friendly. Like he was like, I know how bad corn is. Like I'm a corn farmer and I know that it's not good for the environment, but like it's just financially it's not incentivized. And so I think there's a real role that federal policy could play. Obviously not now, but at some point in terms of, incentivizing these farmers to add that into the rotation. And then, presumably you might see costs go down as well.
Well, we'll see if the Oat Mafia is successful. In the meantime, I am sure that many of us are going to continue paying that $1.50 extra for oat milk in our lattes. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we will continue talking about, I guess, vegan issues here. And we'll learn about which restaurant is now a little under fire for changing their menu. For a couple decades, Wayward Vegan has been a go-to for vegans in town. And last week, one of our listeners wrote in to tell us that they will now be serving chicken, eggs, and cheese alongside their classic favorites. So their post announced that they'd be changing their name from Wayward Vegan to the Wayward Cafe. And their new slogan is rooted in plants, wandered beyond. Have you all been to Wayward Vegan, or, formerly Wayward Vegan, now Wayward Cafe?
I remember in college going there a fair bit. I feel like there was sort of a vegan alley at the top of the Ave.
There's the pizza place that's a vegan pizza place, right, on University?
Yeah, so it was Pizza Pie, and then there was also a place called something like Vegan Heaven, I think, that had like a pig in the logo, and they all, I think, had I don't know if it was shared ownership or just that they were connected to each other, but there was sort of this corridor of places you could go to get vegan food. And in college, we would go and buy one thing and then hang out for the whole day and do work,
The typical college kid thing, yes.
Yep.
Aimee, have you been to Wayward Vegan?
I haven't. No, I mean, I'll confess I'm not vegan. I feel that I should be, but I've not moved it there yet.
So, would these new changes make either of you more or less likely to go? Like, does it change how you would feel about eating there?
To be honest, I'm also not vegan. I don't eat a ton of meat just because it's expensive, but it doesn't make a huge difference for me personally. But knowing what I know about vegans in Seattle, I can imagine the sheer amount of rage that this has probably induced. But yeah, Aimee, I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, for me, no, it doesn't make me. I hadn't been before. I don't live, in the district. So it sort of is like, oh, it's not convenient. Why would I just go check out a random restaurant that now serves meat like most of the restaurants do, But I think in looking more broadly at the issue, this hasn't been a successful pivot for other restaurants that have done it elsewhere in the country. It's usually sort of a last-ditch effort, it seems like, to kind of bring in more customers. And these kinds of shifts, they alienate and enrage their base while not necessarily bringing in omnivores or carnivores. So
there are some people who identify as carnivores, I think.
I mean, 100%. It's like if you look at all of the, meat, man meat,
yes,
all that
protein, always,
yeah, 100%. So I think that like something I was reading in preparation for this basically said like, why would someone choose to go there to eat meat when there's a million other restaurants that do serve meat better, like more broadly, not specifically talking about Wayward. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting, I mean, you can kind of get it, especially with like the hard times the restaurants are having now, but it seems ill-fated, I think.
Yeah, there are some very upset people in the comments of a post that Wayward Cafe made announcing that decision. Many were explaining that vegans are upset because it feels like a bait and switch, that, for years they've supported this place because they serve plant-based food. A lot of vegans, call that cruelty-free food. And now serving meat and dairy goes back on that. And some are calling for them to reverse the decision. Some are even wishing for the restaurant's failure. Like I saw one comment that said, like, can't wait for Spirit Halloween to be in your vacant spot. And
So
other
cruel.
people I think are, yeah, people are mad. I think also some people really feel like this was a storied institution. One comment said, you guys don't understand the legacy you were handed when you bought this restaurant. This is the quintessential vegan restaurant in Seattle. We reached out to Wayward Cafe to ask what led to this decision and how they're feeling about the reaction from their community. And the owner, Brett Willard, reached out saying, we've honestly been overwhelmed by how gracious our customers have been in the restaurant. Many people have gone out of their way to reassure our team that they'll continue to support us and that they're glad we're making changes to keep the restaurant open. It's been really encouraging to our team. So I don't know, maybe that just goes to show that the way that people reacted online are not necessarily the same reactions people are having if they actually are going to the restaurant. But anyway, I do still think this is incredibly Seattle, but what do you all make of all this?
It doesn't feel quintessentially Seattle to me, actually, just because you've also seen it happen in like the Bay Area, in New York, granted, these are all sort of like lefty places, but I think that the anger is real and comes at a time when you also see a lot of companies going back on their larger climate, environmental. Some of it related to food, also their commitment. So I think it can feel like there was this real positive shift in the direction of like veganism and expanding choices there. And I think we've seen that sort of really go backwards. So I think it hits more sharply in like an emotional core for people than just being pissed that, they're making a change. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I understand.
I think it is sort of quintessentially Seattle for a couple of reasons to me. One is obviously just the tenor of the response feels very Seattle, but also the comment that you read, Jane, where someone was sort of saying, like, this is the vegan restaurant. I was looking a little bit more into the history of Wayward, and it is very storied. It started in 1996 as Good Morning Healing Earth was the name of it. And then when the man who founded it died, he passed it on, and it rebranded in 2003 as Rainy Day Cafe. And then the following year, it was sold to, this is how The Stranger wrote about this a while back, but it was sold to a group of vegan punks who made it a collective and renamed it Wayward Vegan Cafe. And I don't know if any of y'all ever went to like Highline in Capitol Hill or Pizza Pie in the U District, but these were all sort of like greasy spoon, like metal blasting vegan spots. So there was this like hard crossover between like punk and vegan that was going on that feels to me very Seattle. Highline was one of those places. It was like on the upper level of like a 2-story building, and you could always hear the metal like blasting out of their balcony.
Yes.
Yeah. So all of those folks have been involved in Wayward. And actually one of the owners of Georgetown Liquor Company, which is a vegan spot in Georgetown, came through that institution as well.
So it seeded a bunch of other vegan chefs and restaurateurs.
Yeah, and it was like a particular ethos of a sort of punk approach to things. So I, like to Amy's point, I get people's anger because it is sort of like, okay, this is a thing that is very Seattle. It has all these connections. And now the people who bought it most recently are not holding on to any of that sort of spirit. That being said, it also does sort of feel like an episode of Normal Gossip. There's a lot of like, inner turmoil going on there.
Or like an episode of Portlandia a little bit. But
Yeah.
I feel like for being a fairly large city, Seattle's vegetarian and vegan scenes are not as robust as I would expect. I moved here from the Bay Area over a decade ago, but I remember at the time being really surprised. So I was vegetarian when I moved here, and was surprised at the lack of options. A lot of the time you go out and there's like maybe one or two options on the menu that don't have meat in them, but they're usually like kind of your go-to like mushrooms, and that's kind of it, or like a salad without any substantial bits in it. Why does it feel this way? Like, am I off base? Like, is it actually the case that we have kind of a lacking vegan vegetarian scene here?
So I did a little poking around on this also because I was curious, and this is data from a couple years ago, but Seattle ranked 34th in the number of people who self-identify as vegans, which was below Houston, below Atlanta, a lot of other cities. Portland, I think, was third or fourth. So, and that I think just lends itself to more establishments that feel like they can only, do vegan only. That was surprising to me.
Houston has more vegans than Seattle.
I mean, as of 2023, maybe it's really spiked here, but yeah, one thing I just wanted to mention, because it's been on my mind even before we started talking about this, was I grew up in Salem, Oregon. There's a restaurant in my hometown, kind of diner like style, but a little more modern. And they were always standard menu. And then a couple years ago, they flipped so that the default is plant-based. So they still serve all the meat, but the default is plant-based and you have to pay more for the meat options. And I was there over the holidays and I was like, this is amazing. Again, I'm not vegan, but I had their veggie vegan burger and it was awesome. And I think so much of how we eat is like behavioral, and there's a lot of behavioral psych components in there. And so I think, letting people have the choice, but sort of architecting how those choices are presented makes a real difference. And I don't think that's going to help Wayward. But I think that restaurants should be more thoughtful about how they're presenting meat-free options, where it is on the menu, how you're describing, them. And I do think that those nudges can kind of help push people more in that direction. So that's something that's just been on my mind in terms of how restaurants are framing these meals.
It's great to hear that seems like a success for them to have flipped the other way.
Yeah, and I think the owner's vegan, and he was just like, this is something I want to do.
It reminds me that one of the things that CityCast Seattle put on our 2026 bingo card in kind of a hopeful way was a vegan Dick's burger. So, Dick's, you have the opportunity to do something fun and to cross off something on our bingo card. But this also gets me to think about, what are the other good vegan spots in town? While you were talking about burgers, I was thinking about Next Level Burgers, which I know is a national chain. I think they've got a location actually not far from Wayward Cafe at the inside of the Whole Foods in Roosevelt. And I know Life on Mars on the Hill is fabulous. Also serves a vegan menu, I believe. And I remember actually, speaking of restaurants that flipped, El Borracho at their old location in Ballard used to just be general Mexican food. And at some point, I think in the 2020s, they flipped to a vegan menu, and it's pretty good.
There's also Araya's on the Ave. It's a Thai food spot that's been around forever. Chumin Tofu, which also has a really cool mutual aid program that they do.
I've heard great things about them.
Yeah. I was going to say, Jane, when you were saying, do we not have a thriving vegan scene? I think we have thriving options for vegans, but they're not necessarily vegan build restaurants. There's lots of places that have lots of meat-free options built into their food culture, and we have a lot of those options throughout Seattle. So I feel like you just have to be creative and thinking about where can I go to get vegan options.
Yeah, if you make good food, I don't think people who eat meat or dairy are gonna necessarily care that they're not having meat or dairy that meal.
Exactly. The other place that comes to mind that's not food but is dessert is Frankie and Joe's. Has amazing vegan ice cream options, which really fills the ice cream shaped hole
outside of the one that I have gone by frequently in Ballard. So
it is absurdly expensive. On the occasion that I buy it at the grocery store, it's $14 for a pint.
Oh, I mean, isn't that kind of on par with a lot of other fancy ice cream places?
Maybe. I guess I'm not in the habit of buying fancy pints of ice cream that are dairy based because that would destroy me. But
as we discussed, lactose intolerance, right?
Correct. Yeah. But I have had cashiers when I'm buying a pint of Frankie and Joe's go like, wow, this must be something special. You know, it's expensive when a cashier is commenting on it.
Okay, let's take a break. And when we come back, let's talk about good news for the week. So it is Tuesday again, and we are here to bring you some good news to offset, everything else. And we like to call this segment Good News Day Tuesday. Sam, what good news have you heard in the last week?
I saw this very sweet story this morning in the Seattle Times that the last of what was called the Gang of Four, which was a group of politicians and activists in Seattle. The last person who's still alive from that group is Larry Gossett, who, for regular listeners of the show, may remember he was involved in the renaming of King County from the king who was a slaveholder to Martin Luther King Jr. And so there was a ceremony to honor him over the weekend, along with a group of activists from a variety of tribes in Seattle who were working on securing federal land for Indigenous use. It just was it's a really beautiful article. It's really worth reading. And I just love it when people get their flowers while they're still alive.
Yes.
And to get to see him celebrated in that way was very cool. So to me, that was great news, and also just a nice moment to reflect on some Seattle history.
That's lovely news.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
So my good thing of the week is that GeekWire reported that Rad is going to get bought, the e-bike company. Ooh. So you all might remember that in December, Rad filed for bankruptcy. Its future was kind of unclear, but apparently a Utah-based company has bought it. They aim to hire back 90% of the employees that were let go. They're going to keep open their showrooms across the country, including the one that's here in Ballard. There was also an EV battery issue with some of Rad's e-bike batteries. And the company says that they're going to aim to replace all of those batteries with newer versions that were placed under recall. So essentially, they're really going to try and keep things running as they were, and it's all going to stay under the Rad brand. So honestly, I think if you weren't paying attention to all of that, you might not even know as a Rad bike owner that anything has really changed. Of course, all of those details are still being worked out, but really glad to hear that folks who bought those bikes, because they're not cheap, will still have support for keeping them maintenance. What's the word I'm looking for keeping them running smoothly, and awesome. That we'll still keep one of our iconic e-bike brands in town here.
That's great.
This is very much good news that couldn't have been written better for you, Jane.
Yes, truly. Aimee, anything that you have heard that is good news?
So hard. There's all the talk of the Seattle freeze. Obviously, this has been around for decades, and I've lived in Seattle at various points. This period is 2.5 years I've been back, and obviously work from home. It's hard to make friends, and I've seen just like an increase in opportunities and availability of groups, of meetups, of organizations that are really trying to facilitate making friends as an adult, and that's been really
hard.
It's so hard. I mean, yeah, especially you're at your desk all day. It's not conducive. So, I think that's just been like a bright spot in the city, and seeing, there's like silent book clubs that Seattle has really leaned into. Every neighborhood has them. There's national organizations like Time Left and Real Roots, which provide kind of more smaller group meetups. I'm on an app called, it's Halo, but Club Cascadia is the group. And it's all about just like facilitating, connections for women, and all like, I do trivia with some people. There's dinners, there's runs. So I think that's just been, as I've been thinking about it, something that's been a real positive in the last months, making real connections at a time when the world is dark.
I love that. I do think that there's something about coming out of lockdown era where a lot of people felt that it was time for rebuilding social networks, because we were all very isolated physically for quite a while. And we saw how those social networks were really important for people's mental health. So,
yeah. And there's a great, I don't know if are you guys familiar with Amanda Littman? She founded Run for Something, the organization, which is about getting younger people involved in state and local office. But she also last year did this big experiment with her husband where they were committed to hosting people at their house for dinner every week.
I read a piece she wrote about this.
Yeah. It's so great. And she's amazing. And, she said, so she's involved in politics. That's her entire day job, her being. And she still said the most political thing she did in 2025 was having people for dinner and making connections. And I think that that's something, as we see with the anti-ICE, with all of the protests happening now and just everything kind of finding ways to make those real connections with people in your community is, I don't know. It was inspiring to me as a way to think about it differently.
I love that. Well, Aimee, thank you so much for joining us today. This is Aimee Rawlins, freelance science journalist. Aimee, if people want to learn more about you or your work, where can they find that?
I'm on Blue Sky, Aimee Rawlins, which I guess you can see the spelling of it in the show notes, I'm assuming. I won't spell it out. Thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure.
And Sam, thank you so much for being here and bringing your knowledge of the vegan scene back in the 2000s.
I've never felt older, but it was very fun, and I loved learning about the Oat Mafia. So thank you, Aimee.
Thanks,
all right, that's all for today here at CityCast Seattle. I'm your host, Jane C. Hu. And listeners, remember, we love hearing from you all. If you all have, I don't know, your vegan restaurant recommendations, send us an email at seattle@citycast.fm. You can also text us or leave us a voicemail at 206-880-3931. Until next time, see ya, Seattle.